All right, welcome back to Wildcard Workshop. I apologize for the delay in getting this video out to you. I know it's been a little while. As I'm sure everyone can tell, things got a little crazy here during the holiday season. Got wrapped up in a couple of the projects, but we're back at it. So we're going to continue on with our VSS tutorials. And today we're going to take that process that we were working on last time where we converted creatures into data, and we're going to convert that data back into creatures. Now, I did have to make some adjustments. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to because more recent versions of the dev kit have make it a lot easier to just take that byte data and just put it directly into the struct. We don't have to convert it to a string anymore. And that was thanks to some of the changes that were made for the sake of the cryopod. So now we can just do it directly. So let's go ahead and pop on over to the dev kit and I'll show you how it's done. All right, so here we are back in the dev kit. Now, as I mentioned, we made a couple changes. As you'll notice, I'm up on 288. You may or may not have this. I'm still trying to get this update out to the Epic Launcher. Once it is, you'll have access to it as well. But because of some changes in recent dev kit versions, we made some changes. Primarily, biggest one, actually no, not the biggest one, but first one. This is actually a very easy change, is with the way that we were storing our creature in the crystal item. So if we come over here to our convert target creature function that we made before, you'll notice we're no longer looping through the byte array and then converting it to a string. We don't need to. This make custom item data struct now has another property in it called custom data bytes, which allows you to make an array of, well, it allows you to store an array of bytes, or an array of bytes. Basically, you can store several arrays in here if you want to. We only have need for one, but that's why it goes into one struct, and then as an element in the second struct that goes into an element of this struct. So it seems kind of convoluted, but it does give us a lot of ability to store pretty much however much data from creatures or other items or whatever into these custom item data structs. So all you have to do is make that change. You just remove that for loop. Instead of taking from this and then looping through it, we just run that into custom item byte array. Do a make array, put that in the first element, then do a make custom item byte arrays, and then pop it right into the struct. And that's the only thing we need to change here. Now, there was another change, and this is probably the biggest one, is in our segments, I reparented the structure. It is no longer a child of this foundation or the Sentry Tower base. It is now a child of Sentry Tower segment generic. And the reason for this is because the crystals, if you remember correctly, we were having them generated as an item that was a trophy. I wanted to co-opt the visual display of like the artifacts, how they show over a trophy base. But I also wanted to attach them to the segments as a structure. Well, it turns out you can't do that. These items cannot, at least as far as I was able to figure out. There might be some weird, convoluted outlier conditions that might allow it, but general base rule is that I was not able to make them work that way to where they could be a placeable structure and an equipable item. The reason for that comes down to this right here, this my item type. Basically, in order to make it a placeable structure, this needs to be set structured. In order to make it an equipable item, it needs to be equipment. So since we can't have both, this is what we get. Now, another change was that, again, we got rid of the structure parts of this. And now, this is just an item. The way that we'll make this visually identifying out in the world is that we'll basically make it appear somewhere on the segments the same way we would trophies and the artifacts. So we're going to go that route. So those are the changes that we made since the last one, okay, as far as what we'd already done. Now, as you can see, like, this is sort of the process where we run into problems, we come up with solutions. The solution to not being able to do both a structure and equipment was to pick one. And then the one that gave us most of what I wanted to do happened to be the item rather than structure option. Now, the next thing that we did, and the primary of this episode, is we actually went into, in our Sentry Tower Foundation. This is the bulk of what we've done today. So, to start, one thing is, again, this is going to be the lowest level of our sentry towers. Now, I added a sphere component. Okay, just a generic sphere component from here. Just type in sphere, it'll be the first thing that pops up. And then I came down here, I set the sphere radius to 500. We can play with that later. And then this is extremely important. Come down here, make sure that you've got the sphere components selected. Come down here to collision presets. Now you will want to make sure that these match, because what I did originally was I had set it to overlap only pawn. That sounded like what I wanted. I want this to react whenever players or creatures run into the area. Well, there was a problem. I couldn't access the inventory of the segments anymore. Okay. It would only allow me to access the multi-use of this base. And for a while there, I was sitting there trying to figure out why. I couldn't understand it. And it's because the way the multi-use works is it does a trace, okay, from your player. Now, the trace was hitting this sphere. Even when I'm inside of it, it was colliding with this sphere area. So it was thinking that because this sphere was part of this structure, all this multi-use. Basically, that was a problem. So the easiest way is you can go to overlap only pawn. Go ahead and select that and then select custom. And then all you have to change is on these trace responses, turn both of them off. Put both of them to ignore so that all of the trace responses are on ignore. After you have turned off all of the trace responses under object responsives, most important ones, we might turn off all of these other ones that say block, but the most important ones are these player and dino pawn under overlap. Okay, these are the ones primarily that we're going to be using. Now, I also had to turn on generate overlap events, and that's that. Those are all the changes that we made to it. Now, after you have created it, the way that we handle those overlap events is you select the component there, you go to add event. Now, they're not going to show up in the list because I've already got them in the graph, but you'll see add on begin overlap, add on end overlap in this list. And you'll want to select those so that it adds them to your graph like this. Okay, it'll add these events here for your component. Now, basically, these events are right now they're very simple. We're going to refine these, make them do some tracking of how many things might be in the area, but for now, we just wanted to get it working for testing purposes. So when something enters the area, it will start combat state, which I'll explain in a moment. When something leaves the area, it'll toggle this is in combat, cool, and then it'll go through all of the virtual creatures. That's what this variable is. We'll go over that in a second. It'll go over all of them and then destroy them, which is what we want. When there's no more threat, we want the tower to shut down all of the virtual creatures. We don't want them to die and be harvestable. We want them gone immediately. Maybe we'll put in a particle effect to make it kind of snazzy, but we don't want them to leave behind a body because that could be exploitable, because these creatures are constantly being regenerated. Now, yeah, and as I mentioned, we added that component. I also added some variables to the blueprint itself. First one is connected defense segments, connected augment segments. I basically have separated out the two segment types for easier tracking, and whenever certain events happen, it can just go through it without having to do any kind of sorting. I added a B is in combat. Basically, this is just a state operation, basically whether or not the tower is actively defending or not. And then an array of Primal Dino character to track our virtual creatures that we've created so that we can also destroy them when we're done with them. And then also a rally point. And this is just basically going to be the point that creatures are spawned at. Now I want to make this customizable, like the player determines what the rally point is. But we do have a starting one just to make sure that there is one that is operable. We might refine that a bit, maybe do some traces to make sure that the starting point is valid and safe. But for right now, this works. We're on the event graph. Okay, so when the Sentry Tower foundation is placed down, go through, we make sure we're on the server. Then we start a timer. Now, this timer calls a function called update connected segments every 10 seconds. We are definitely going to increase that timer to be a bit longer. But basically, this is what is going to keep these arrays here updated. After we set that timer, we go and we create our rally point. Basically, we get, if the rally point set here is not 0, basically this one, all of these other ones they don't save. So on a game restart, they're going to be basically zeroed out, except this rally point. We want the rally point to stay because that's a user setting, basically. So if it's not 0 when this starts up, then we want to get the actor location of this. We want to get its forward vector. Now remember, because of the way that we play structures in Ark, the forward vector is not necessarily the one that you would expect it to be. It's actually going to be what your forward vector would have been as you were placing it. It's not going to be facing you. So we can multiply that forward vector by a negative value to get what we have made as the front of the tower structure. It'll make a little bit more sense when I demonstrate it. And then we add those two together and we get our rally point, just our starting one. Later we'll figure out a way to make it so that the player can set a new rally point. Now, the big one right here, start combat state. This is the big to-do of this structure right now. So the first thing is we've got that is in combat bool. We check whether or not we're already in combat because we don't want to keep spawning the same creatures every time that somebody enters the area. We want to have a little bit of control over that. So we check to see if the creatures already exist. We check to see if we're already in combat, already been spawned. Whether or not they exist is sort of separate because players could have been killing them. We don't want to regen already killed creatures just because someone has entered the area again. So if we're not in combat, we're going to set that state because now we're entering combat. We're going to get an array of all of our connected defense segments. Oh, yes, we will come back to this. I apologize. Let's update connected segments. This one happens first. This is the one that happens on a timer, okay? So first we check if we're in combat because we don't want to be doing this while we're in combat. We don't want the tower updating during that time. That could be exploitable. So once we're in combat, tower functions are a bit locked down, okay? So we're going to clear out both of those arrays just to make sure we don't get any duplications. We get all linked structures. Now this works by basically it's a function that we've included, and the way it works is it kind of goes through the array of linked structures that is already on this class, on the structure class itself, and then it goes through all of the structures in that list and gets all of its linked structures, and so on and so forth. And then finally it returns a compiled list of all the unique structures that are all connected together. So we're going to loop through it, and then if it is under one of these two categories, we're going to make sure that the just in case this does return some duplicates, that's what this is about, is if it does, if the connected segments array already contains that that particular segment, it won't be added. It'll only be added if it's unique, basically. So we're going to do that for both. I know we haven't really done anything with augment segments yet, but because the tower segment already exists, it was easy enough to just put it in here anyways and get it taken care of. So now once we're in combat state again, if we're not already in it, we put ourselves in it. We'll loop through our array of connected defense segments, and then we want to get the item data from that segment, if it has any. Okay. What this does is we've got the segment reference, right? So we've got our structure reference right here, okay? Provide that to this function. We say get my inventory component, get the array of all of your equipped items, because now, as I mentioned, the segments themselves are now have inventories, and they have that trophy slot again. Just like with the virtualization station platform. And that is our signifier that is the crystal that we want to use for power. So we'll loop through that array right there. And then we will cast to make sure that it is of the Sentry crystal type. If it is, then we're going to get custom item data of VSS Sentry to get the struct that we desire here. If the struct is found, okay, we're going to say have item data. If true, we're going to store it here. We're going to break on that. So basically, the first time it finds a valid item in the equipment list there, which should be immediately or never at all, then we're going to break out. We're going to return that item data and say, hey, yeah, we found data. Basically, that just gives us an early out for this execution here. If we don't have data, this won't continue. If we do, though, then we go to convert item data to Dino data. Okay, so we're kind of following that same methodology from the virtualization station platform in that I have broken down this process into step by step. Okay, so now we've got the item data. Let's go ahead and convert it back to Dino data, and that's really easy. Basically, we're just reversing the process from when we made it. As you can see, I'm getting index 0 of this item data bytes array, and then getting the array of bytes from it. And we're basically recreating our Dino data from it and returning it. Now, once we have it, we want to spawn the virtual creature. Okay, we pass in item data. Now, I have given it a parameter for the segment, and that's because I want to have some particle effects moving from the segment to the point where it's going to be spawned. So while this parameter is here, I'm not using it yet. That was just more for, all right, I'm planning to do this. I think I'm going to need this here. This might go away in the future if it turns out we don't need it, or if that method won't work. But with our arc Dino data structure now, we call this function spawn from Dino data. You may need to turn off context sensitive in order to get this function to show up. That. Give it the Dino data. Do a K2 get world to give it the world context. We give it the rally point as a location. It also wants a rotation. So the way I decided is we want it, no matter where it spawns at, I want it rotated away from the tower. The way I've done this is I grab our rally point. We call this function called find look at rotation. We give it the target as the tower itself. Okay. Now, based on this, it would point it to look at the tower. But we want to reverse that by breaking the rotation, and then we add 180 degrees to the yaw, and then put it back together into a rotation struct and feed it in. Now, the core team is the targeting team. Basically, who owns the structure? Okay, this targeting team variable is one that's on the structures already. This is your team. This is, your friendlies, your enemies, how the game identifies whether or not something should or shouldn't attack you, or whether or not it obeys you. So we tell it, hey, we want it to be on the team of this tower. Okay, so these crystals could potentially be traded in the future. They could become their own currency, who knows? And then I tell it generate new Dino ID, just to make sure there's no duplications, because there is the potential that maybe these crystals might have the ability to be duplicated in the future. But just make sure that every creature is unique and its Dino ID. The way to do that is just to make sure that we've got that checked. And once we create it, we add it to our virtual creatures array. And that should be just about it. Yeah. So now I can show you really quick this in action. Let's pop our PGD here into the map. Hit play. Okay, so here we go. Pop into my inventory. Now, I still haven't put in icons on anything. I know it's kind of ugly. And place down our platform there. And place our foundation there. Go ahead and place the segment. Okay, so we've got our segment there. Pop up here. Spawn our Anki friend. Drop all of our items in there just to test that we didn't break the existing functionality. Start virtualization. And then, yep, there it is. We've got our crystal still. So now we get to see for the first time whether or not these crystals work. Take that, put it. Oh, haha. I was scared for a moment. This is an augment tower. My mistake. My mistake. Oh, that's why. Haha. I don't know why I've forgotten what. I gave myself the wrong one. Oh, let's see here. Yeah, we need fence tower. Pop that. Working on this on a different machine, so all my commands are different. Well, most of them were different. So we will pop the augment, or the fence tower up there. And now, there we go. Now that's equipped. Now we're going to get out of range. We're going to give it a few seconds to let the tower update, get stock of its segments. Then, boom, look at that. There's our Anki. So now as you can see, so this right here, this direction is technically the forward direction of this foundation, which is why I reversed it so that it looks like it's pointing out from what we would normally see as the front. Oh, there he goes. And that's because we left the range. So that's one thing maybe we'll use the augment crystals for, is to increase the effective range of these towers. Look at that. There, he's gone. There, he's gone. There, he's gone. As the poop explodes in comedic fashion. Yeah, that's something else we'll probably take care of, is to make sure that they're not having to deal with like pooping in every time they spawn in. We'll probably adjust the material. Maybe we'll have an effect come from the segment to where they're spawning. There's a number of things that we could do to really pretty this up, but here you've got sort of the basic functionality of how these work. And then eventually maybe we'll set it so that this will immediately direct the creatures to attack whatever's in their target list. And then we can bind to the on-died events of the target list so that when something does die, we can update all of our virtual creatures and let them know. Ooh, had a little bit of a hiccup there, DevKit. Edit, cut, level up, blew out the speakers. Cutting that. But that's about it. I mean, we've got the general functionality. It doesn't seem very pretty. It doesn't seem very useful right now. But what makes it pretty and useful is in the details. But we can take a simple concept like this, something that just, oh, we got a creature, it spawns, and then we can change the way it works to make it more interesting. So there you go. Now, it's not polished, as you can tell. Our creature's just sort of popping in and out there as we enter and leave the range. This is fine, okay? Right now we've got sort of that basic concept of taking the creature, turning it into that crystal item, putting the crystal item into the structure, and then being able to take the data out of it and use it to spawn creatures. Now, in the future, we're going to make sure, we're going to double check to make sure I work with multiple creatures. We'll probably create some offsets so that they're not all spawning directly on top of each other. We'll start adding custom materials. We'll probably use a buff to do our modification to the creature itself. We'll maybe make some basic augment crystals so that we can maybe expand the effective range based on a bonus or something like that. But until next time, happy modding.